Hello and welcome. Thank you so much for joining me. My guest for today is JL of the channel Bridge the Divide. I only came to realize who JL was fairly recently, and the algorithm was suggesting his content, and I started watching it, and I was really impressed. And so I asked JL if he would come, and sure enough, he did. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you very much for having me.
And if you don't know JL and you are not subscribed to Bridge the Divide, there is a link in the description. So make sure that you click that link and go on over there and give him a subscribe. And let's start out, JL, by telling us just a little bit about yourself.
Ooh. Well, I can keep it to a nutshell. As it stands, currently, like where do I begin? Where do I begin? So it was 7 p.m. in 1980. No, I'm just kidding.
Is that when you were born?
Yeah. But let me see. I myself, I'm JL. I am I'm a filmmaker by trade. I do film production and screenwriting and such. But I also do a lot of focus on. So that's kind of like what I do outside of YouTube. But here on YouTube, I focus on rationality, reason, education, and exploring the claims that individuals make and addressing the rationality behind why they're making the claims, and kind of use my educational background in psychology and pathology and a number of other fields to explore these things, try to things like epistemology and explore these concepts to make sure that, number one, we can bridge the divide by getting everybody on the same page and acknowledging that we need to approach these things with a bit more education, a bit more humility. So just trying to do my small part.
Now, have you always been an atheist, or did you used to be a theist?
I used to be a theist. I was brought up into and raised and confirmed in the Methodist faith. My mother and my father were a part. My parents were a part of that, and it was it was a couple of years after. I would say it was about a year, maybe a year and a half after my confirmation, when I started to recognize that there was some logical inconsistency in what I was being presented. So I had the narrative that was presented by the church, and then there was the observations that I was making. So I was automatically, I recognized the cognitive dissonance of reality not matching what was being claimed. And so from there, that kind of began the questioning. It's kind of like you ask that first question, why am I seeing this if this is what is being reported? And that began what turned into like a little over a decade-long journey of asking questions, investigating, sitting down and talking with self-described experts in the field, and of course education as well, and diving into these concepts, because my conversations with people with theologists and other individuals would lead me to philosophical concepts that I didn't understand. That would lead me into philosophy and then, of course, sociology, a number of other fields, and then applying my psychology and my pathology background. It all just kind of like worked. It worked in tandem. It was pretty brilliant. And slowly but surely, began to realize that these concepts, they just don't hold water. There's reasons why I understand fully the reasons why people hold to them, but logically, there's no logical consistency. There's no rationality there. And I was like, if I focus myself on what is true instead of what validates myself, that should be what's important, because that's how we can bridge the divide as a species and get past a lot of the more ancient tribalistic notions that cause a lot of conflict for us in day-to-day life. So a little over a decade after that, I came to the conclusion of, I realized I was an atheist because it wasn't an active choice that I made. It resulted as like, there's no other position to take, which is why it's really important to me that a lot of theists out there understand that it's not something that somebody actively chooses by saying like, I choose to be an atheist. It's like, no, it's not. It's literally a result of the elimination of we can't hold to these irrational concepts. We recognize that they fail on a number of fronts, and we're left with the position that we are not convinced and therefore we do not believe. So, and that's another big thing that I focus on. I found it was really important was a lot of people out there, by virtue of the groups that they're affiliated with, are not operating with the appropriate information. That it does come down to education, to understanding these things. And I find that just by explaining these things and make sure that they're saying, like when someone tries to describe the Big Bang, like I don't believe the Big Bang because X, and I realize, well, X is not what is actually being taught, and so let's actually talk about X so you'll better understand it. And they go, oh, okay, now I see it. Like, and then we can, once the gears get moving, then we can make some progress. So, and it all just kind of like perfect stormed into the content that I do today. So.
One of the things that I have just noticed in the past couple of weeks is, and it is a place where we need to bridge the divide between the atheist and the theist, is we take the position, okay, we can't choose to believe what we know does not logically make sense.
Right.
And the Christians are saying, yes, you can choose to believe it. And I've seen Matt Dillahunty try to explain, and I can't remember his name now, but there was another atheist that used to use the example. Okay, he'd hold up a blue cup and say, can you choose to believe that this cup is red? And so I get the atheist standpoint, but I've recently seen a Christian standpoint that says, okay, if I don't know 100% for sure if Christianity is true or if atheism is true or something else, then I can choose, because I'm making a choice between different things that I don't know 100% sure. Like, I know 100% sure that, the cup is blue, but I don't know 100% sure on some of these other things.
See, that's interesting, because that response to there's a number of it. There's a number of like problems that are in that particular response. So, and I can't remember who. I remember the blue cup. I myself, I can't recall like who exactly brought that up. But it's kind of like, it's like, I think another favorite of mine was, can you just right now choose to believe that you're a piece of cheese? And they'll be like, I could, but I choose not to. So like this. But the reality is, they could conceptualize that they are, but they could not believe that the conceptualization was in fact the case. So that's where it kind of falls apart. So what the problem with the analogy that they brought up is that when faced with that, number one, when faced with, I don't know if a God exists, I don't know if a God doesn't exist. So saying that like atheism is true, that's the first issue, because it's not that atheism is true. Atheism is true if you yourself don't believe in the existence of a God or gods. If you lack that belief, you are an atheist by definition. So it's true if it's accurately describing you. What they're talking about is like non-theism. It's a conflation that they often make. And so I don't know if a God exists or doesn't exist. And so then that goes into the rationality as to why you're choosing or why you hold to one particular thing, because how are you justifying? Because ultimately this all comes down to justification. And so they don't have a rational justification for accepting a particular thing. So they reject the other one as a result of whatever they're appealing to. So it's an appeal to emotion, like, the concept of a God gives me hope or whatever. I'm so scared of death and it alleviates my existential dread. So therefore I'm going to accept it as being true, even though I still can't make myself believe it. Okay. They can accept it as true and operate as though it is. But if they don't know, they can't just say like, I believe that it does. They can operate as though it does and kind of like hold it as a true proposition, but they don't. It's not like saying like, I believe that gravity is real. Okay. Because that's different than just saying it's a mental conceptualization that they're saying, I can't determine if it's true or false, but I can operate as though it is true, because it doesn't, because it doesn't like, it's not like I'm going to walk off a building in that respect. So they'll operate as though it does. And this is kind of comes down to how a lot of, I don't want to be insulting, but a lot of people who lack a kind of like the philosophical education and the difference between knowledge and belief, they wind up using belief in a way that's not accurate. And so they need to be able to recognize that distinction. So
that's exactly what I was seeing from your answer, is that there's different, there may be a place where we're talking past each other because we're
Mhm.
talking different definitions of the word belief. Yeah. Yeah.
It's kind of like theory and hypothesis, how they'd be
Mhm.
like, well, evolution is just a theory. Well, you're using theory in the context of being a hypothesis, like an
Right.
educated guess when a scientific theory. So it's really important. So that's part of and I love, and one person I love who does this so well is Professor Dave Explains. I'm a huge fan of his, and the way he's able to articulate that there is very, very context specific terminology here. So if we use a term in a specific context, it has a very specific meaning as to what it's referring to. And if we use it in a colloquial context, it's more malleable, and we have to be very, very careful to recognize that malleability, because that allows people, if they're talking in a certain context, to come to some pretty wacky conclusions about the field that they're engaging with. And so that's the education part is so important. And I hate to say it, but given the state of education in the nation today, where we at, I live in the number 50 state, and that's a real huge problem. So, and that's why I kind of do what I do and focus on what I'm focusing on, because we need a huge effort to work against that.
Now you say the number 50 state, and I have seen the number 50 state as Kentucky, Mississippi, or Florida, depending on what category you're looking at.
Recent,
Is
the most recent study that was released puts Oklahoma at the 50th, because
Oh, really?
there was a big press conference that Ryan Walters and other
Ah.
individuals had regarding the current, like I think it was released just like a month or month and a half ago, that
Mhm,
basically, because Oklahoma was 49th, and
mhm.
then you had Ryan Walters, superintendent of education, and a number of other people say, we're working to improve Oklahoma education and blah, 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 blah. And then the next report came out and we dropped to 50th. And so everybody was like, what are you guys doing? And
We're
their
trying
whole
to get the Bible into
right. And
schools.
their whole excuse was, well, this is just, them working against us, and it's all a conspiracy. And I was like, no, it's bad education. Your anti-intellectualism is affecting the education of people, and therefore we have dropped to the bottom of the nation. So it's really bad.
So, getting back to your story of how you came out of theism, I assume you
Mhm.
were a young adult at the time when you were asking all these questions?
Yeah, it started like just shortly after my sometime a little bit after my confirmation. I was probably like 13, maybe
Oh,
almost
so you were
14.
younger than I realized.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
And the first place I went was my parents. Actually was
Mhm.
my mother, because my mother was typically more involved in devout than my father was. And I went to her, and she was like, I can't answer these questions. Maybe you should go to the pastor. And so I went to the pastor. Pastor is a good friend of the family. He's a great guy. He's really more of a philosopher than he is a pastor. That's probably why he's, with the Methodist Church, or why he was, because he's long since retired. But he's a good dude, good friend of the family. And I was like, I knew I could go and talk to him about these heavy topics. So I started asking these questions, and there were some that he simply didn't have an answer for, or the reliance was upon faith. And faith was I always had an inkling in the back of my head, even though I didn't know how to articulate it, that there was something problematic about faith, just believing. And I didn't know what it was, because I was young and I was ignorant, and I was like, but something bothered me about that, is like just the notion of just accepting it. And I recognize now, looking back, that and this is something that my mother cringes over, is because my mother, the way she raised my brother and I was to always ask. Never be afraid to ask questions. If a thing doesn't make sense, or if you don't understand, ask a question, because she ingrained in the two of us that not knowing a thing is a position of strength, and not the position of weakness that a lot of society will try to make you think it is. That not knowing something puts you in a position to gain more knowledge and improve your position, which is a great place to be. But, a lot of people say that if you don't know, it's a weakness. And it's like, if you don't know, you're just, well, that incentivizes people to just bury themselves in what they think is true, instead of trying to go out and find what is actually true. And so my mother inadvertently set the foundation for me leaving,
Oh,
even though
wow.
she's still devout. She's still devout today, but she
Uh-huh.
set the foundation, because when these things didn't make sense, I had to investigate. I had to ask. And so I put these questions to the right people, and that led me on this journey. And it's actually the result of why my mom and I, unfortunately, haven't spoken in some time, because she and
Oh, that
I
is
got it.
unfortunate.
Yeah, she and I got it. Wasn't really even an argument. My
Mhm,
mother said something, and I pointed something out to her in her
mhm,
reasoning.
mhm.
And I was like, and I didn't do it very delicately, because it's my mom. We know each other, and my mother has always been the smartest person I've ever known. The older I get, the smarter she gets. But when I saw her make this mistake, I was like, whoa, 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 whoa. It was kind of shocking to me that, like, the person I hold on such a pedestal could make such an obvious error that she herself would recognize. And when I pointed it out, she took great offense, and we haven't spoken since. So, because my mother's a very stubborn woman, that's where I get my stubbornness. It's the way it is. But um, neither that's beside the point. But the whole point is never be afraid to ask. And
Mhm,
so I
mhm.
drove those questions, and I drove them hard. And when one person couldn't answer it, they sent me somewhere else. Or if nobody had anywhere to send me, if it's like just rely on faith, that became problematic. And then when I learned about epistemology, what epistemology was, I was like, that's why faith is so problematic. That's why it is, because faith is just a complete rejection of how we know things. How
Mm.
we determine what is knowledge, the difference between knowledge and belief, what is reality. And I was like, there's the break. And so on and so forth. Slowly it just kind of shed away, you know.
Wow. When you say that, I think of my grandchildren. My oldest grandchild is 13, and she has 3 brothers coming that are all each 2 years, there's 2 years between all of them. And the 3rd child in that family is brilliant. He's absolutely brilliant. And when he gets to that age, I think he's going to be just like you. And my daughter has said that she's allowing her kids to be free thinkers. Although I also know that that's not really true, because she forbids them to see any of my content.
Oh,
Even though I have made a couple of children's videos, and even a children's video that was specifically addressing a question my grandson asked me that I didn't have time to answer him at the time. And so I wonder if the rules are going to change and questions will no longer be allowed, or, if the kids are just going to go off on their own and figure this out for themselves. But we shall see. We shall
right.
see. Mhm.
It's scary, because you
Mhm.
wonder at one point, when you get such heavy duty pushback, especially from like institutions, or like position, like people in positions of authority, pushing back against, like, logical rational inquiry, and pushing a particular narrative. The only response I've ever found that kind of works to that is that the truth has nothing to fear from inquiry. And so
Exactly.
if what an individual holds as being true, if they hold it as true, if it is in fact the truth, then exploring it, or like testing it, or whatever, that's how we confirm these things. And so when they reject the idea of testing it to ensure that it's confirmed, and that our beliefs are rationally justified, when they reject that process, that
Mhm.
goes to show, when you expose that, it's kind of like they have to acknowledge that there is a level of bias here, that they are concerned that the testing will reveal it to be false. And if that possibility exists, then it's time for some very serious self-reflection, and maybe some conversations with other individuals, because you should never fear the truth. Truth is not to be feared. Truth is what is. And so why be afraid of it? If you acknowledge it, just like we've always understood, acknowledging and understanding the truth allows us a modicum of control over that which was previously unknown. It allows us to understand the world, and as on the flip side, the world ceases to control us, to dictate how we behave. We can conform our behaviors to what we know, instead of just hiding in fear from that which we don't know. So, and that's important to do, because you've nothing to fear from the truth.
Patty from the Apostate Sisters is in the chat and has indicated that she did not know you. And so do not be surprised if you get an invitation to go on the Apostate Sisters channel in the
Oh,
near future.
cool. Absolutely. It'd be a pleasure.
Okay. There is one program that you did that I especially wanted to focus on,
Hmm.
and we may go over a little bit over time because I like to let my guest have pretty much all of the time, and it's going to take me about 5 minutes to set up this question. But here it is. The top Calvinist theologians in the country until recently were R.C. Sproul, Tim Keller, um, McCarthy, John Piper, Doug Wilson, and D.A. Carson. Keller, McCarthy, and Sproul have all recently died.
Yep.
Carson has Parkinson's disease and has for several years, and he no longer speaks or preaches or does any kind of public events because of his health. So all we are left with is John Piper and Doug Wilson.
Yep.
And I'm sure you know that Doug Wilson is an absolute dumpster fire. I mean, he's one of the most despicable people that's walking the earth right now. But John Piper comes across as this kind, gentle man that you would love to know. And in fact, the church that I went to in Fort Wayne, Indiana, the pastor that I listened to and learned Calvinism from practically worshipped John Piper. If he was going to be out of town, he pretty much did not let anyone else share his pulpit. He would show us a video from John Piper if he was going to be on vacation. And when I started making content, one of the early videos that I did was a response to John Piper. And I was absolutely shocked at what he did, which was he was answering a question from a person who was starting to have doubt.
Mm-hmm.
And he was telling him about when he was doing his graduate studies in Germany. And he said, I discovered that all of what we know about the Bible is based on guesswork. And how can we ask people to base their lives on guesswork? And then he completely ignores the question that he set up, turns the conversation, and I'm like, wait a minute. You just asked the most important possible question and you're not even going to answer it.
Right.
And I say all of that to set up, you recently did a response to John Piper, and tell us a little bit about that video.
So I kind of came across it at random. And because I was just looking for like additional content to pull and check out, and came across this guy, and I was like, oh, this is a response to, I think I think if I remember correctly, the whole thing was like, what if I can't believe? Was
Right.
his response to
Yes.
what if I can't believe? I've tried, and I was like, okay, I want to see this response to this, because I knew that the guy. I kind of had an inkling about the guy's like position. He's not like like a Catholic in that respect. He's going to approach this in this particular direction. I know how the Catholics respond to that. I was like, how's this guy going to take it? And so, the thing that got, and he opens up the video by reading this letter, or basically reading the end of the letter. It's like the end of the letter, like, I can't believe I've tried for 2 years, like that. And he did what got me, and I was like, I have to respond to this, was he took, after he read it, he takes like this, and this is what it's so, what caught me is that he ends the letter and he just takes this moment where he's like, like this big
he
huge
always
sigh.
does
I'm
that.
like,
Mhm.
and I'm like, how, I knew, and just the level of performative, empathy there. I was kind of like, what are you doing? So I had to see what intellectually dishonest way he was going to take this.
Mhm.
And if he'd just been like, oh, well, this is the end of that, I've been like, oh, whatever. But I knew that the deception was coming because of the whole, like, oh, this is so, it's like, I was like, okay, yeah. Instead of like addressing it, well, what are you setting up? So I knew there was going to be some level there. And I was like, let's see how deep this is going to go. And he did the exact same thing that you described. And that deal was that he completely ignores the problem at hand, because the question was about, I can't justify believing in these things. And even if I can't confirm if the letter is real, because sometimes individuals, they'll just make this stuff up. They will create scenarios out of pure, like, just cut them out of pure cloth, whole cloth, whatever, just to try to push a particular narrative. Like, here's this situation that I've invented, and I'm going to use the situation that I've invented to specifically push a particular point in my narrative. And I'm like, we have to be able to expose that. And I was kind of like, okay, not a lot of context from the letter, but what is this guy going to do? And he basically creates a problem that's legitimate, a problem of rational justification, and then proceeds to then employ the tactics of deliberately ignoring it and addressing something that is not even on the table. But the worst part about it, and the thing that really aggravated me, was there's two things going on. One, that whole, like, that Mr. Rogers kindly, soft-spoken approach. It's something that a lot of Catholics do. And I find it deeply, deeply disingenuous, because all it tells me that they understand that what they're doing, that what they're espousing is completely irrational, but they do it in the nicest, most friendly, most congenial way possible, that it will come across as being sincere, and that their sincerity will translate to logical consistency. And I don't like that. It's emotional manipulation at the base. And so I was like, okay, so he's being emotionally manipulative by presenting it this way. And then the heart of what he reads, the heart of what he says, is essentially the cult mentality of blaming the victim for not being able to do what others do. And if even for like if we even take, just say the person who wrote the letter is real. The person who wrote that letter did not say that they don't believe in it, that they're just like, they said that they can't believe, they can't justify the belief, but they want to believe. They're in a precarious emotional state. They are struggling with this thing because they fear, they believe it's real, but they just can't believe it in the respect. So they fear like hell and damnation and loss of salvation, but they just can't believe in this, which is what told me this event likely never took place, that this letter was manufactured, because they're expressing a fear of damnation and a loss of salvation, while also saying they're afraid, but they can't believe in Christ and ostensibly by extension God. So what are they doing here? So obviously there was something hinky here. But then he goes on to do what I've heard innumerable pastors and others, both sides of the field, both Catholics, Protestants, all of it. And that is blame the victim, blame the person who can't do it for not recognizing what is so obvious to them, was so obvious to the pastor, and that, and turning what they are interpreting as a bad thing or as a negative thing into like a positive, which completely diminishes and disenfranchises their experience. So I knew I had to take the opportunity to respond to that and be like, as like, hunky-dory, soft-spoken, grandpa in his rocking chair telling you a story kind of like presentation he's giving you. This level of this rhetoric is like I like what Apostle said, is insidious. It is dangerous, because if there are people out there that are in this emotional state, you completely just like disenfranchised, disregarded their entire position, like who they are, their identity, in favor of your cult narrative, in favor of the narrative. You basically said what you're feeling has no value, okay, because because this is what it says. And so instead of addressing the problem, he completely dodged it and made what I saw as a potentially bad situation even worse, because the guy has no background in like legitimate psychology. He doesn't know how to address people on their terms. It's always you address people as an extension of the cult that you are a part of, which automatically, like diminishes identity, removes autonomy, removes any sense of like the self, as opposed, and replaces it with the cult perspective of these things. And so I thought it was a great example of how dangerous this stuff is, and even if Piper is not aware of the damage he does, or how damaging, his rhetoric can be, at least if he watches my video, he will then, but he may just dismiss it. I have no idea. I have no illusion that he's going to watch it, but
yeah,
I felt that other
I
people
seriously
needed to,
doubt he'll see it.
Right. I felt that other people needed to be aware of that, because it was like, holy, I was like, okay, this is just like, some nonsense, whatever. But I was like, oh, wow, this is a fantastic example of just what we're talking about here, And I wanted to dig down into it because it was just like, and it's so gross, hidden behind that, that facade, just. Ugh.
Jesse Meyer is absolutely right. The question ties in with the tension between free will and determinism. You say many Calvinists, but I would just say Calvinists believe that God determined who would believe. At least I know Piper does, but still holds those who don't accountable by sending them to hell.
I found that Calvinists as a whole is that they're really more ready and willing to accept, even though they'll never pause it, they'll never proffer it up at the start. They're more willing to accept that that the logical problem of evil doesn't really apply to their God, because they acknowledge the reality that some people in their worldview, they assign that there are people who are the elevated, people who are the select, and they're the ones that are going to go to heaven. And the people who are not select, they're automatically going to go to hell. They're destined for it. There's nothing that can be done about that. And that is for the greater good, in order to show the glory of God, or whatever, in that respect.
Right.
And they will not argue with the obvious narcissism that is at play here, that what this tells us about the character of the character of the entity that they believe exists. They acknowledge it, or they'll simply say there's a reason for it, that they're going to hell for a greater good, So, and they'll just hide behind an appeal to mystery, instead of acknowledging that there's no logical necessity for why it must be this way. And so it's just self-serving, the God is just serving itself, I'm God and look at what I can do, yay. So they will more readily be it appears to be that God is an ass. I don't want to cuss.
Oh no, you are, feel free.
Okay, so
I reserve cussing for when I'm really ticked off.
Sweet.
So people know that if I'm cussing, I am really ticked off.
So they'll readily admit, they'll kind of sit on the fence. They won't be oh yeah, God's an asshole is what it is. But they'll be it appears that God is an asshole to us, but there is obviously a good reason for it. We just don't know it because we have our feeble monkey brains and we can't understand it. But it's gonna be good. It's for a good. It was really. So that this is the level of cognition that we're going to apply to this problem. But they they reconcile it how they reconcile it. It doesn't solve the logical problem of evil. It doesn't solve any issue. It just kicks the can down the road. And just another example of the cult mentality. Instead of don't ask, just keep your mouth shut and follow.
Yeah, it also doesn't address animal on animal evil. But the thing that I have enjoyed doing when I've had Calvinists on my show, and it's also broken my heart, is I will ask the Calvinist, if you find out that God has not chosen one of your children to be one of the elect, are you good with your child going to hell? And every Calvinist I've had on the show has always said, yeah, I'm fine with that. And I have told them, please do not let your child see this program.
Right.
And they're like, why not? And I'm saying, and that's what breaks my heart, that these people do not understand that their children watching their parent say, yeah, I'm fine with my child being tortured for eternity, doesn't see how horrifying that would be for their child to see. And they absolutely do not get that.
One of the I found in my studies, and from a sociological perspective, and acknowledging how certain groups, they artificially generate in-group, out-group distinctions. One of the biggest problems that a lot of not all of them, but many religious ideologies have, because there are some religious ideologies that don't have a problem with it, and that is basic human empathy. And that is recognizing that one of the barriers to in-group, out-group distinctions that kind of it almost has the capacity to defeat our inherent tribalism is our capacity for empathy. So it doesn't matter if the person is so far removed from your out-group. Empathy is what allows us to recognize suffering in other people, even those people who are beyond, are so outside of our complete strangers on the other side of the world. You can go to another country, you can see it, you can recognize the suffering of things, or you can recognize these things. You can empathize with the pain and the internal experience of other people. That reality, that evolved capacity, thanks to our limbic systems, results in ultimately kind of undermining the in-group, out-group distinction. And so and while you have things like Jainism and Baha'i and a number of others that recognize that empathy as a strength to bring everyone together in unity, and they utilize that's a great thing. That's why, if I was to ever have like an ideology that I adhere to, Buddhism would probably be the closest, or maybe even Jainism. The problem is I'm a carnivore. I really like meat. So, like that. But in that respect, but Buddhism would be the closest kind of a philosophy in that respect, because it recognizes the underlying empathy that unites us all and kind of like defeats that tribalism. We can bring these things in. But with Christianity, Islam, Judaism, and other ones, there are obvious in-group, out-group distinctions. And with empathy undermining that distinction, you have to find a way to reinforce the elimination of empathy as something that people can rely upon. And that goes with Calvinists, it's really, really bad. The lack of empathy to have to be like, yeah, I'm okay with my child going to hell. That's perfectly a good thing. And I'm like, it's just like, because that's the way God has intended. The lack of empathy is reinforced by the indoctrination that their God is ultimate and that they themselves have zero value unless the God says that they have value. And so that in turn extends to everyone around them. And so that whole concept eliminates empathy as something viable within the worldview. Your empathy means nothing. Your ability to literally look at suffering and internalize the experience of others and to not want that to happen anymore. You don't want it to happen to you. Therefore, you don't want it to happen to others because you can internalize that. That whole thing has kept us alive for millennia, for hundreds of thousands of years. And yet now they reject it because it undermines the cult mentality of bringing people in under this particular banner. Because if you do empathize, I don't want my child to go to hell, what it is, then you can't reconcile that God is all good, that this thing is all loving. Because why would your God do this if this were the case? Like, your child is born. And this is such a tragic deal, and my heart goes out to anybody who's experienced something like this. Your child is born with a genetic malady that results in their death early on. And then you find out later on that child was not part of the elect and that child goes to hell. Okay? Or maybe they were a toddler or whatever, but they never had an opportunity to really do anything or be a part of the world. And then they wind up dying from some tragic circumstance. And then you find out that they're in hell because they weren't part of the elect. And that's a good thing? No. You have to reject your empathy in order to accept that that's a good thing, because your natural instinct, the natural impulse is to internalize their pain and their anguish, especially as a parent. And I'm not even a parent. I think I can conceptualize that. And that's the natural impulse as a parent. And then you need to take that and throw it away because that undermines the authoritative hierarchy that we have going on here with this group. And so they have to really, really push that. And it's really scary to have people running around acting like this. And it just, I would say it both breaks my heart and it absolutely infuriates me that people are willing to throw away their very identities, out of fear, because of fear or whatever. And it's just like, but it just goes to show how cults operate. It's a long progressive process that starts with controlling what people know, controlling what they, the information they have access to, controlling how they feel about things, and it's something that I think, affects us all, being a part of the society we're in.
That dovetails right into what William Lane Craig has said. And I've used it a couple of times. And just your reaction tells me I think you're aware of where I'm going, which is the conversation he had with Alex O'Connor when Alex asked him about the suffering of the Canaanites in the Bible. And William Lane Craig, who is not a Calvinist, not by any stretch of the imagination, and his response was that it was a good thing for Calvinist babies to die, because then they go straight to heaven and they don't have to suffer living life here, which, I have two reactions to that. One is, therefore, abortion is the greatest good that a person can possibly do.
Sends them right up.
Yep. And second, I wish I could have an apologist say that to me, because being the parent of a child who has died, and my child died in utero at 30 weeks gestation, I would love to go to the microphone and ask that apologist, are you trying to tell me that when my child died, I was supposed to be happy about it? And see what they say about that.
Yeah. It's disturbing on a level. The not just like, on its face, but also the mental gymnastics that will be performed to try and get around these things. I if I can approach it like this, this is and the thing you brought up is important. Logical entailments, the logical entailments of the claim. That's where Alex typically always gets him. Is like they state a position, the logical entailments of that are, there's logical entailments to that, but those logical entailments they don't hold to. So it shows contradictions in their worldview. They're not taking them to account, taking into account all the things that are connected to what they're stating. And that's kind of what I do when it comes to like. And that's the difference between Alex and I, and the difference in and so what you'll find if you come to my channel and you look at my content, I'm not a giant fan of diving into theology. So like, if you're looking for like theological, like discussions like that, Alex O'Connor is a fantastic source. Other individuals do it really, really well. They dive in like Deconstruction Zone, Justin over Deconstruction Zone is fantastic at doing the theology argument. My whole problem with it is that the theology in and of itself is predicated upon one proposition, that the God exists. And so if the God doesn't exist, and this holds for like whether you're talking to Calvinists or you're talking to other like Christians or whatever, they reject the theologies of other religions because they do not hold that the gods that are undergirding those theologies, that they don't hold that they exist, or at least they don't exist in that particular form. So the theology that's built up around them is not true. Well, the same goes for Christianity. That just shows that they're the special pleading for their own, because if the proposition cannot be determined to be true, then the theology is worthless. So, and what aggravates me about like William Lane Craig is the amount of gymnastics that he will engage in order to try to justify these particular things at a theological level. And I've always seen I've always felt that such conversations were just like gilding the lily in that respect, because we're not addressing the heart of the issue. And that is, we have a proposition that people are being convinced is being true, that is leading them to a host of other irrational beliefs and therefore irrational behaviors that affect other people. And that needs to be addressed. So in my content, I will always go after the heart of it. And that is, does this thing exist to do the things that they think it does? And so you'll see me go in that direction a lot. And like, for example, the beautiful thing, and yes, Fred Harvey's like, just wind JL up and let him go. I'm so long-winded. I truly am. I love what Alex asked there, is he's pointing out the logical entailments there and showing how they're contradictory to what William is stating. It's putting him into a moral bind. And it's smart. It's good. It's good stuff. But I would have asked, what is it that exists external of the God that dictates what must necessarily be? And it's kind of like, we have to ask these questions, is like, if the God thing is itself, if God category is there, okay, God either does things because it must do them, or the God thing does things because it wants to do them. Because obviously if it doesn't want to do it, it's not going to do it. And if something happens that it doesn't want to happen, obviously there's some level of control there's some measure that is outside the realm of its control, which means it's not ultimate. So there's something else external of the God. So, but in their worldview, there's nothing external of it. So the God just does what it wants to do. It doesn't do it because it has to. It does it because it wants to. So anything that exists because the God wants it to exist. And so from that, you have to acknowledge why things are the way they are, when there are other logically possible ways that they could be, which is why I love Alex's unnecessary suffering concept. The thing is like, unnecessary suffering doesn't have to exist in order to facilitate anything. Of course, nothing needs to, there is no relational facilitation that is necessary in that worldview. Okay, God doesn't need to do X in order to facilitate the existence of Y or to accomplish Y. It can merely just actualize Y. So what's the necessity of X? And so once we start addressing that, The theology kind of goes out the window, and we can get to the heart of these big things. And I know that my content's a little bit different, and I hit a little bit harder on that. So some people may say, I come at it differently. I'm not as soft spoken as like Alex is, but yeah, I mean, I like that. I like his approach. I just, there's just different ways of going about it.
Okay, a much more lighthearted question. As I've watched your content, I have been trying to figure out what that green thing is behind you. What is that?
Okay. So for those of you who don't know, when I kicked off my channel, and so this is actually a little bit of a preamble, a little bit of exposition that goes into this. So I worked for like almost 7 years at this soul crushing job. Okay, that didn't allow me to do anything creative whatsoever because all of my time was spent at work. Now, I did get to do some cool stuff. It paid me very, very well. It was a very, very lucrative job, but it was soul crushing, just like labor. It was just soul crushing work is what it was. I don't believe in souls, but it was very, I had nothing. Okay. I myself am an artist and I'm a creator in that sense. I do stuff. I'm a filmmaker. I'm an actor. I'm a producer and stuff. But when I was working this job, I had no opportunity for any type of creative fulfillment. So it was just like, Now it did allow me to like buy my first house and, buy my car and, get married and go on vacation, stuff like this. But it wasn't great, So when I left that job, when I finally left that job, and I was in a good financially, I was in a very, very good position because after I left, I wanted to do something super, super creative. So the first thing I did was I wrote my first, it was a novella. I wrote my first novella. And so I was like, I wrote that lit the fire. And then afterwards, it's like, maybe I could try this YouTube thing. I could do that. That's great. So I started doing like sporadically YouTube content. And then I was kind of like, I want to do something more. And so I was like, what can I do? And a good friend of mine was kind of like, you should do a podcast. And I was like, well, a podcast? I don't know if I could do a podcast. He's like, come on, dude. All you need is a microphone and a love of hearing yourself speak. And you love hearing yourself talk. So why not just make a podcast? Everybody else does it. And I was like, you know what? Kevin Smith does it. Kevin Smith, smokes a bunch of weed and then gets on and talks about movies. And it talks about movies and comics and stuff. So why can't I do that? So because I'd gotten back into doing creative stuff and I'd been working on a couple of film sets because I got back in doing work for people during the 48-hour film festival. I started making some connections again. I met this really, really good guy named Eugene Hawkins, who's a great friend of mine and he's a fantastic director. And so we started working together and I got this idea. Maybe I could do a podcast about horror films because I really, really love horror movies. I love scary movies. And so we started up this whole thing. And I was like, you know what? It's like, would you like to do a podcast with me? And this was during the creative downturn during the logalurgy, as Creaky likes to put it, during the pandemic. And I was kind of like, there was no jobs because there's no sets. So we're like, we need something creative to do. Let's do a podcast. At least, it'll be fun. It'll be some experience. It'll last maybe a couple of months, whatever. And it turned into like 5 years. So, but nonetheless, we're like, let's do it. And then all of a sudden it started getting successful. Okay. And so I was like, so I curated my office to reflect what, the things that I love, and horror films is a big thing. And that big guy is a life-size statue of Jason Voorhees from the Friday the 13th franchise, which is my favorite horror franchise. He's my favorite villain, my favorite slasher. And that is a life-size version of him from Friday the 13th Part 7. So it is life-size accurate to Kane Hodder, who is the actor who played Jason in that movie. And I've had the opportunity to meet him a few times. He's a beautiful dude. He's just a wonderful guy. But that is what that is. And the mask comes off. It's very, very, it's very creepy, scary looking. And I was like, I have the money and I have the freedom. I'm going to get something very cool for my office. And I found that. And I was like, I'm getting that. And then I set up the little closet space right there with the kind of underwater effect, because Jason is commonly in Crystal Lake. He's underwater in Crystal Lake. And so now it's the underwater effect of Jason in the lake. And people have been looking at it and be like, I've gotten so many comments on my content. It's like, I just saw the Jason in the corner and I freaked out. I was like, and I was like, yes, it's very cool. So a fun little thing. It's Jason Voorhees. If you're not familiar with horror films, that's who that is. And there's a whole reason why he's my favorite, because it's a reflection of human nature in the sense that we are pursuit predators by evolution. We engage in pursuit predation, and the notion of the stalker, of like the slasher who just like Michael Myers, Halloween. You know, they don't chase after their prey. They don't really ambush their prey. They just stalk their prey unrelentingly. That's what we do to our prey. We basically stalk it until it gets so exhausted it can't fight anymore, and then we go in for the kill. That's how we hunt. We're pursuit predators. Slashers, like horror films like Friday the 13th and Halloween and others, that's what they do. They prey upon the human fear of having our own tactics turned against us. We become the prey, and they become us, you know, relentlessly stalking after us until we're so exhausted we can't fight anymore. And so that's why I kind of love that, because it's turning humanity on its face, what it represents as far as the genre goes. And so, you know, so there he is, big guy.
Okay, very good. Glad to know.
And there was a lot of story behind that, but a lot of people may not know what led to me buying this giant statue that's sitting in the back of my office.
Now, you've mentioned a couple times that you're a filmmaker. What kind of films do you make?
Predominantly, I work on horror films and psychological thriller films. The films that I write, whether they be short films or feature films, are typically, you know, they're in my wheelhouse. I understand like the field of psychology. I understand, especially in aberrant and abnormal psychology, and of course, a number of other fields. And so I can utilize my knowledge there to kind of like, you know, to inform how I write my characters and I write my situations in order to elicit the best reaction from the audience. And so I typically write psychological horrors, horror films, slasher films. I've written those, horror comedies, but typically in the scary film genre is where I operate. And it's been a blast. So especially when you write a script, you know, I punch out a script and then I hand it to a director. I hand it to a director, typically Eugene. He directs a lot of the stuff that I write. And so I hand it to Eugene, and Eugene's like, okay. And they run with it. And then I get to go to the set and I visit and I say, you see what you've written on the page? You see what you've written like in life? It's like, there's the killer I wrote. There's the action scene that's about to go to, and seeing it in reality is always such a blast. It's kind of like, you know, so it's always kind of cool. But yeah. Write what you love, write what you know, and that's what I've always dug. So,
what are some of the films that you've written?
So, for those who like, you know, find my IMDb, you can see some of those. Short film, nothing major that anyone has ever seen. My stuff runs on at this point in my career, like where I'm at, my stuff runs on festival circuits. And also like, so you won't be stuff that you'll see because it's what other people see. You have to go to like a festival to go see it. So like a recent one that I wrote called 11 to 6 is about a girl that gets trapped in a diner by a killer, and she has to defend herself from this killer that's locked. She's locked in a diner, and there's a killer trying to get in to get her. And so she's trying to like, you know, and then she winds up defending herself. It's a big, you know, huge fight scene. So awesome stuff, you know, like heads getting thrown around. It's fantastic stuff. But that one like made the festival circuit all around the country, but you'll likely never see it unless I show it to you. It's on YouTube. So there's like 11 to 6. There's Nail Gun. A couple others that I wrote for Eugene that are on his channel, on his Vimeo channel, like Pure Hands and a number of others. But I've worked on several. We do have some projects in the works that I can't talk about yet because of certain contractual obligations, a particular reboot that we're working on. Yeah, I would say it's a reboot. It's a reboot and a horror comedy that I'm trying to get off the ground that I really hope to get funded. So yeah, just at that point, I'm not famous. I'm not a famous writer. It's just that, you know, you got to start somewhere, and, you know, doing short films for people and doing, you know, like, you know, the occasional like feature for friends to get something shot. That's how we build our careers up. So.
Okay, very good. Okay, I'm going to go into what is normally my closing announcements, but do not leave because I've got some comments and questions that I want to get to, and I'm going to get to them after these announcements. Okay, first announcement. If you are not already subscribed to Bridge the Divide, there is, for those of you in the chat, there is a comment pinned where you can go and click that link and subscribe to Bridge the Divide. If you are watching this later, it is also in the description. just click on the link in the description, and you can go and subscribe to Bridge the Divide. Second, I want to let you know what I have coming up next week because it is really cool. I have a friend by the name of Bill Cluck that I have been involved with a little bit on the Atheist and Christian Book Club. And he was originally, when the Atheist and Christian Book Club was started, it was Bill Cluck and James. I can't remember James' last name off the top of my head, but anyway, the two of them started this as a way to have conversations between atheists and Christians with regards to various books. And they also found that a lot of people just don't have time to read the books, especially since they'll announce like a week before the show what book they're going to review, and you don't have time to read the book in that much time. So they also put out a video of the author talking about their content. And so you can watch the video about the author in preparation for the club. Well, through that club, Bill Cluck has actually become a theist as opposed to an atheist now. And he did so primarily because of the fine-tuning argument from Jason Barnes. And I recently saw a blog post of Dr. Richard Carrier demolishing the fine-tuning argument, and specifically the fine-tuning argument of Jason Barnes. So I asked both Richard Carrier and Bill Cluck to both come on the show so they could have a conversation together over this topic. And that is next week's topic. Okay.
That's going to be awesome. I'm so checking in for that.
Okay, that out of the way, I've got a couple of things that I wanted to get to that I've been holding for some time. Okay, first of all, thank you to Dr. Andy for the super sticker. I appreciate that. And then I've got a question and a comment from Dan. I'm not sure if it's pronounced Sata. And he said, anyone else here who finds the state of the United States hard to imagine? I mean, this is a neutral man. I mean this in a neutral manner. Growing up in Central Europe, I never had the impression that religion was affecting education much. And I'm going to give my answer, and then I'm going to let JL give his answer, which my answer is it fucking does. And if you remember my comment from earlier about how often I swear, it fucking does. Because Ken Ham is the #1 seller of homeschool materials. So the majority of children who are homeschooled are getting homeschooled with religious material that is teaching them the earth is only 6,000 years old, that all of humanity was wiped out by a global flood, survived by 8 people who then repopulated the entire world. And not only did those 8 people repopulate the entire world, but those 8 people settled in Babylon, and they were there for 100 years, growing their population, and then they spread out along outside, the rest of the world, such that all people derive from the Babylonians. And they want us to believe this. And this is what so many children in the U.S. are being raised with. And even children who are not homeschooled, those who are in the public school system, as JL mentioned, there is a real push to bring the Bible back into school and to push religion in school. There's a huge push from the Christian nationalists saying that it is unfair for the secularists to be able to have a stranglehold on science. Mm-hmm. They want to push that we should distrust what scientists are telling us. And this is such a dangerous thing, as we have seen during the pandemic, where in the United States, there were so many people that distrusted the vaccines because this is what they were taught from their education system. Mm-hmm. And Jay, I'll let you have at it with your answer.
I know it's really, really hard, especially in I would say in more intellectually progressive countries. It's hard to conceptualize what it'd be like to have such a rampant anti-intellectualism push. But we've been dealing with it since the early 1900s. All you have to do is, if you really want an idea as to how bad it is and why Gigi's punctuation here is so appropriate. You go back to like the Scopes monkey trial in 1925, and you have to look at all of the times that this very, very notion of like where these religious these theological concepts have gone head to head against science and intellectualism and evidence like this in our legal system. Like it didn't just happen once; it's happened many, many, many times. That we have actually, this is an argument that has actually been had in the highest court in the land, where we have had to take evidence and things are back and try to like defend teaching people what is true, as opposed to just reinforcing the beliefs that they've been indoctrinated with that can't be demonstrated to actually be the case, that directly violates the very fundamental notions of what our country is. We have one, for lack of a better term, one saving grace in this country, and that's the First Amendment. Okay, and the Establishment and the Free Exercise Clause is literally our one saving grace here, and that is because we can't, it literally just it informs us that we cannot enforce or cannot impose certain religious ideas upon everybody. We cannot have a state-sponsored religion, because we acknowledge that not everybody believes the same thing. We cannot tell people what they believe, and that the representation of their government is contingent upon specifically what they're believing. That is the importance here, that secular notion. And so the fact that we've been having this fight since 1925, for a century, we have constantly had to go back to the plate, back to the courthouse to fight these things out. That is just some notion there of how bad it is. And now, and this literally, because it's the same fight over and over and over again. Okay. And which is why like Oklahoma is where it's at right now. It was bottom of the barrel. Now it is literally the bottom of the barrel, because putting these things in the hands of the states is one of the worst decisions possible. And fortunately, we still have that First Amendment. As long as we have that, we can always hang our hat there, and we will always win in court. But like you said, when you only have one thing, if the First Amendment were to ever change, that would be that's the whole point. For y'all, it just comes off as like common sense. Unfortunately, the escape from religious persecution opened up the barrel for everybody to like believe what they want to believe, which is great. You can believe these things, you can reject these things, whatever. But it also opens up. That's why it's so emotionally infuriating. It's hard to articulate. Do you remember, who here's a Star Trek fan? You Star Trek fan? Star Trek fan. Okay, Star Trek TNG. All right, the drumhead. All right, Picard's words to Worf. The price of freedom is constant vigilance. There will always be people who will be waiting in the wings, waiting in the shadows, to rise up and try to turn things, or to turn things in their direction. And we must be constantly vigilant for that. We just stand up against this. Okay, we can't allow that because of where it leads to, because it eventually leads to the situation that we were trying to escape in England when we came here and forged this nation in the first place. So it always comes down to that. So it's a legitimate thing. It's a problem that exists because of our apathy, because we rested too much on our laurels and what we've done. So, it's really infuriating to think about. We wish it was common sense. We do. We wish it was, but with the way that politics and religion and the way these are intertwined with where the money goes, the fact that there's so much money involved, it's a bad mix. And hopefully one day we can fix it. So.
And then on top of that, we've got the continued anti-intellectualism with Trump going after Harvard University and trying to trying to pull all federal funds away. I absolutely applaud Harvard University. I understand that they're losing money like crazy right now, and I hope that they can survive this.
And of course, the cronyism and the flunkies that are all around him. Like, I think, and I'm with Professor Dave Explains on this, with Dave Farina. RFK Jr. is one of the greatest threats to the future of our nation, because it directly addresses, because what he's dealing with, what he's in charge of directly addresses like the health of our nation. And like, stripping, like, for example, stripping like that $500 million that was earmarked for vaccine research and everything. And that just like the things that he's doing are demonstrably are beyond dangerous. And so, but that's because of this push for anti-intellectualism, this anti-intellectualism push. And it is really, really terrifying. We do what we can to try and fight this stuff, but it's hard to reconcile, because like I know from the perspective of like, if you were living in Denmark, or you living in Finland, or or Norway or something, you're looking at the US going like, what are they doing? How is this even a conversation you're having? And that just goes to show that here in the United States, there is a greater push for self-validation than there is for the pursuit of the truth. That people would much rather be made to feel better about the things, made to feel better. People would rather feel better about it. This is a kind of like a nationwide problem. And the vast majority of people would rather feel better than they would dealing with the truth. And that's one of the biggest issues we have, is like fear, stuff like that. So,
to me, that's kind of a junkie mentality. The junkie wants his drugs. He doesn't want to face life as it is.
Right.
Okay. And the final comment that I wanted to bring up was, I still find a lot of Dark Matter 2025 skits holding up well, like God being enraged that he technically is an atheist if he doesn't believe in an even higher power than himself. That is an interesting thought. I did not see that one. I will have to go look for that one, because that I had never thought of that.
It's fascinating. I remember that, because is God to himself is the point. If God is an agent, and if God has if the term God has a specific designation, then the category of God itself, is it God to itself? Does it consider? But if it is itself, then there's no gods for it, because it is the thing that is the thing. So it's like, wait a minute, if there's nothing above me and I don't believe, and I know because I'm omniscient and I know everything. So God doesn't have beliefs, God has knowledge. So it doesn't, it knows that no other gods exist. So therefore it itself would be an atheist, because it doesn't believe, because it knows it, so it doesn't hold the belief that any other gods exist. So it's just, because is it God to itself if it is just the thing? So no. In that respect, it's kind of like it's God to us because of the hierarchy, but not to itself. It itself is just itself. It's just the entity that does the thing. So technically, by definition, by logical entailment, it itself is an atheist. So
okay, that
made humans made in God's image.
Oh, Ember has just posted the link to I don't know if it's a playlist with God and Jeffrey cartoons. Okay, very good.
Oh yeah, he's fantastic stuff. It's goofy looking, but the points it's like goofy animation, but the points he brings across are really, really solid. So
I've watched a number of them, but I have not seen those specific ones.
There's a number of web comics. It reminds me of like web comics, like I think it's like XKCY or something like that, XKCD, that's it. And like they'll have stick figures. Just stick figures, so it's stick figures, so it's not impressive, but the things that are in the speech bubbles, that's what's impressive. So it's very, very, very cheap presentation of very, very strong and very, very important ideas. So I've always dug the kind of juxtaposition there. Very simplistic presentation of very, very important topics or very important concepts. And it's along those lines. I love Dark Matter. I think, it's great stuff over there.
Okay, Jael, that was everything that I wanted to cover. Is there anything that you would like to talk about or promote that we did not cover?
Okay, so first and foremost, I do want to kind of give, for anybody who's out there, if you haven't heard about it, there is a movement going on called Stand Up for Science, which is working to try and protect, like intellectualism in this nation, and to protect our most vulnerable, our elderly and our children, from the damage and from the potential damage that individuals like RFK Jr. can do. Check out Stand Up for Science. Just Google it, and it'll bring you to everything you need. There is currently a petition going on to try and force Congress's hand to reevaluate having RFK as the head of the HHS.
Oh, cool.
I got it. I was informed of it by Professor Dave. I put it on my channel as well in the post. Go check that out. Sign the petition. We need to get more names on that thing because we have to address the potential harm there. So that's a big thing that I wanted to promote. Stand Up for Science. Just look for that and you'll find it. And beyond that, I hope you all check out my channel. I have new content coming out. I have I typically tend to do some low-hanging fruit, and then I do some heavy-duty, like, investigative stuff. I've got Trent Horn, a video on Trent Horn that turned into something so massive it became 2 videos. So now it's a 2-parter, which I didn't anticipate, because Trent Horn's a Catholic who does like what Brian Holdsworth does. It's that whole kind of thing. So, but that turned into a massive.
It's on a different level, though.
Right. And
Trent
so
Horn is a lot more sophisticated.
And so, but that's why it turned into, when you actually dive into the stuff, it was like, this is going to be an easy thing. It wasn't. It so wasn't. It turned into a 2-part video that I was like, this is too long. This could be an hour long. So I've split it into 2 videos. And of course I drop on Fridays as well. So some fun kind of low hanging fruit stuff, but I've got new content coming out. I hope you check it out. I hope you like it, dislike, you just interact with the channel. Throw me a comment if you have any questions. I'm always open. And yeah, I hope to see you over there,
Okay. Thank you so much for joining me. It has been an absolute pleasure having you.
Thank you very much for having me. I've watched your channel, and I love the stuff that you do. I love your approach, and it was just an absolute honor to go and kind of share the space with you for a bit and have you on here. So love it. Yes, thank you so much for having me. This was a blast.
Live your life.